Paneer, just a minute. Dr. Prakash Paneerselvem. He has done masters in defense and strategic studies from University of Madras. He has done MPhil and PhD from JNU in international relation. And currently he is a professor of National Institute of Advanced Science at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. So sir will be taking session on international relation, foreign policy of India, geopolitics. Please make the session more and more interactive. Whatever the doubt you have, please come forward with those doubts. Please feel free. Additionally, we are also for the interview students, we are conducting one-on-one session on DAF review. So there are a lot of questions from their DAF. And also we'll have one-on-one review from the various aspects from the interview guidance. That is number one. Secondly, next week we are going to conduct mock panel interview. So those who are interested, you can register here and get the benefit. And additionally also, if you want, there are some students who are lone. They don't have any group with whom they can discuss. So they can come forward. We can connect with some more students who are giving interview this year, so that they can discuss more and more topic with those students. So thank you so much. Now I welcome Dr. Prakash sir and take the session from here. Thank you, sir. Please welcome him to the platform.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much, ma'am. So first, congrats. I think you heard, you're going to be cleared your written exams, and you will be facing the interview. I think that's the biggest challenge you overcome. So I think it's a very tough task, and I think you have another important milestone to cross. And I'm also happy to see a lot of female have cleared the exam, and equally with men competing in this civil service. So I'm basically work on international politics. My area of interest is on maritime security, Indo-Pacific. So how many of you are aware of maritime security? You guys know what is maritime security is? Yeah. So yes. Yeah, it's a coastal. It's a huge, big domain. So I practically look at some of the aspect of maritime security, which covers huge set of issues, from coastal issues to piracy and drug trafficking, or any kind of things happens in high seas. So I cover huge. My focus is mostly on India's maritime security. So if you're quite interested in looking at what India's maritime security is, so I publish a lot of papers. You can just Google my name, Prakash Paneerselvem. You will find out my profile. So my list of publication would be there. So I given a task here. One is to give you about overview about global geopolitical scenarios and the emerging trends in India's foreign policies and India's neighborhood policy. So I think these three are important topic. For example, who's going to face the interview, and India is a kind of a major power in the region. So it has a very important role to play in the global role, and your development and your economic and security also linked with external impacts. What's happening in Ukraine, Russia-Ukraine war. It also affects India's development, its relationship with the US, and its conduct of business in the international politics. So it's very important for any like bureaucrats of anybody of citizens like to understand how these things are happening. So I'm going to just go through all those points so that if you have any questions, please let me know. You can stop me in between. So we are not going to have like kind of a teaching, like we're going to have a kind of interaction much, so that you can also learn, and I also learn from your perspective and what are things I should address when I speak. So I hope you understand. So what is the difference between international relations, international politics and foreign policy? So we keep hearing these terms, right? International relations and foreign policy. What is the difference?
The policy that our nation has, which through which is the lens through which we view our international relations.
So how you come to foreign policy? What is, you have India's foreign policy, right? So how you come to this foreign policy? Okay, this is the foreign policy we should have.
So it is built in a historical context.
Okay.
For example, India values freedom and human rights, and also it values its own independence. So we have the foreign policy of strategic autonomy, where we don't take sides. We prefer neutrality, not just neutrality, but having an international order that is conducive to the development of our nations, all the nations, but also rooted in our values of peace, non-violence, etc.
True, actually, yeah, that's perfect. Like, yeah. So it's based on our own understanding of looking at what's happening externally, based on our own thinking. So what I'm trying to ask, international relation is a kind of academic subject. So you must have heard this term realism, liberalism, and international. You must have Hans Maganto's theories, like you must have gone through it. So my understanding, my teaching is, my interest is always like why state behave in this fashion in international politics. So for example, a psychologist will try to understand why these two human behaving in this fashion, right? So international scholars will try to understand why this particular state is behaving like this in international relation. So that's my domain. So I just want to ask you why state behaves. So when realism, there are two school of thought. One is the realism. So it's always a national interest. So one nation want to build, like for a nation, it's like as it's want to acquire it has to go through its development and economic goals. So the ultimate point, it's the survival of the particular state. So that is very important for a state in international politics. The survival is very important. There are different scholars who will argue that it's not only just survival, but they also want to expand their reach. They want to expand their influence, power of influence in the region and beyond. So there is two important set of theory. One is neorealism and one is classical realism, which discusses largely about why state behave in this fashion. What I'm trying to understand is that it's not actually a kind of a one person view or opinion, and this, or it is not emotional interest of a particular person which is driving the foreign policy of any country. Okay, according to the international relations, all the states, including North Korea, including everybody, is the rational actors. So they make decision based on rationality. Okay, we must have hearing, like you must have read the papers, you know, like they call it North Korea as a rogue nations and Iran is like an axis of evil. Is a Western interpretation. So they actually argue because they are not following their interest or their goal. So they try to brand them or construct as a kind of a rogue nations and everything. But they are the rational actors. They are a state, they are a kind of entity, they are a sovereign nation. So they have all the rights as rights like any other state has. So international scholars should not have like, when you're answering your questions, so about like, it's not, you should not have bias towards any particular states. Because they are all equally and important members of the UN and they have equal rights to exist based on this sovereignty. So it's very important to understand this basic phenomena. Like then only you can able to interpret. Even I have like set of issues to discuss here. Even otherwise, if you want to interpret certain international events, you have to understand these very basics. Okay, first, state or rational actors, and they act on their own interest, for survival. And some actors like major powers, for example US, they use their economic development and the military goals to expand their influence. Okay, so these are very important factors. I hope you understand. So, what is happening right now in the global scenarios? Like, what do you think a very important point you think it's currently happening in 2025? You think it's a very important to discuss now? So, anybody can come out with anything? US tariffs? Sorry?
Venezuelan crisis,
Oh, US Venezuela crisis.
India-Russia partnership.
So, how do you think US Venezuela crisis is affecting India?
So we do have certain amount of plans for the peninsula, right? We had gained, we gained money, have some deposits in Venezuela, our own money in Venezuela for the purchase of oil. But because of now US tariffs, we are not able to study back all the product.
Okay. So, but how it is affects the geopolitical relationship with the US? So, India and US has a major tariff issues happening. Like Trump again is a very classical example. So, many people accuse him of not following certain norms, you know, not behaving properly, like if to say very colloquially. But what we understand in the first times, so all the actors are rational actors. It's not like about Trump. It is about the US. So what is happening in the US? It's realigning its priorities. Okay, Trump is just a kind of symptoms of it. Okay, so what's happening in the US? US is undergoing a major domestic political crisis in terms of its priority in international politics. Okay, and its competition is not with India, and its competition with emerging China and Russia. So the competition, how it is affecting India? So one example case is the tariff. So what's happened, like Trump himself said that why he is like very being harsh with India is to teach Russia to show that what he can do to its friends and allies. So it is also ultimately a point where US is using tariff as a pressure point to ensure that the Russians and the Chinese also will understand or follow the US follow the US principles, like take US tariffs more seriously. But the problem with the tariffs is not just with US relationship with India, and US also has a similar kind of problems, has levies, tariffs, many other countries like Japan, its close allies like Canada and Europe. And if you saw, like anybody had chance to read US National Security Strategy, which has been released recently, like what it says, like what it's.
To EU region, the civilizational decline within EU region, and the geostrategic and importance of Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific region, especially with respect to Chinese aggression.
Yeah.
So the necessary role of India, Japan, Australia in Indo-Pacific region as well, and Middle East feels like more about salt Middle East region.
Yeah. So US thinks actually the Europe is not the biggest, like in the post World War II, from the starting of Marshall Fund to the Europe, rebuild the Europe, till like Ukraine war, like US has the backing of Europe. But recent national security strategy, there's a huge shift, taking the pivot, like the importance of the US foreign policy from the Europe to the Indo-Pacific. So it clearly shows that China is becoming a major challenge to the US dominance. So what is happening between US and China? So when you talk about this great power competition, right? So what do you understand great power competition, where it is happening? You say that competition, right? It should happen somewhere, right? So how like some people say, like scholars say that this particular country is winning this competition. So what they actually understand when they say that?
That is through comprehensive military aspects, economic, technological race. For example, AI race with respect to deep sea process OpenAI.
Yeah.
Technological race.
So you are partially right. So what happens if you want to be a superpower, or like say like there are certain domains. So if you control those domains, you will be a major power. So what are the domains? These are the global commons. You know global commons? Yeah. So maritime, space, cyber, electromagnetic spectrum, And these are the major domains. So the competition is happening in these domains. So whoever control these domains, for example, maritime, because that is the major trade happening. Over 95% of international trade happens through maritime domain. Okay. So US used to, like, there is a saying in, like, whoever controls the Indian Ocean will control the world, kind of things, right? Because ocean became an important aspect, in terms of transportation and trade. So whoever control the ocean, they control the trade. Similarly, the space. So you have like satellites, like where satellites, we use all cell phones and other technologies, and we use GIS mapping and all this, whatever, like for example, Swiggy, Zomato, and all those things use the GIS technology, GPS technology. So primarily because that's actually another domain which is very useful for your economic growth as well as your military, because you are using all the missiles and all the ballistic missiles, your navigation aspects, it's all depend upon your communication and navigation satellites, right? So what India uses GPS. So what China uses? China had built its own satellite navigation system. Do you know, any of you? Baidu. Baidu is the system which China developed in, like, after understanding that US is going to be a major challenge to them, they started their project in 1990s, Baidu system. So they have their own navigation satellite systems. So it is used for commercial, military and other purpose. And it also, like, forcing other countries, like, not forcing, like, it also lend those satellite navigation used to by Pakistan, other like-minded countries. So their entire economic ecosystem, like both military, economic and other things, have been integrated into the Baidu system. So if you see US-China space competition, China has been, like, trying to reach in terms of launching major satellites into the space compared to the US. If you Google it, as till now, US has been dominating the space sector. They are the biggest launcher of space, and they also have a huge stake in space, like Elon Musk coming out with a different set of systems. So China is trying to beat and trying to match the competition. So like Elon Musk, similar to that, China is also trying to launch satellite system which will be used to connect with the rural network areas, free internet in the China, and it also want to compete with the US in terms of space power. And the competition is not only about economic growth and development in space. And if you can see, there is a lot of satellites which is also being used in order to target other satellites in space. So what's happening in the ground, like the other two systems like colliding, similarly, the China and the US have a system where they can try to damage other satellites in the space. So this is actually quite happening right now as we speak. So there is huge challenging happening in the space. If you go through it, there are like space debris which has been scattered around the space. So this has been creating a lot of issues for the countries like India, how to launch the satellites, because space debris can damage your satellites. And this has been a major issue in terms of space domain. So cyber domain. Cyber is also another important aspect where both US and China compete. Right? US, for example, you have all the social networks like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp and everything. It's been controlled by the US. So China is also competing in that space. Like they don't use any of these US tech companies. They have their own tech. Why they have their own technology? Why they are not going with the US? Because they know that US like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, I don't know, is there any other social media, LinkedIn, this also has a kind of tool to monitor you, like control your preferences, like change your idea about like certain opinions. So China has their own alternative of all those things. So to understand, like the US is going to be the major part, so that China invested their own Facebook, WhatsApp, their own social media platforms and everything. If you visit China, none of your app will work unless you have VPN in this. So space domain is actually again a major area where the Chinese has spent a huge money in terms of not just for like military purpose, but it also for the economic growth. So what you're talking about data centers, data, when we're talking about artificial intelligence and data centers, so each and every prompt, like you search in ChatGPT, it has creates a set of replications where you use a huge resource of energy and resources, so the data center has become very important. So in India, you must have heard recently there is a 2 data centers coming up in Andhra Pradesh, and like there are many actually. For example, if you see in Southeast Asia and in Indo-Pacific, there are many data centers are coming up. And China actually have their own data center processing centers, and they have been working on artificial intelligence. Even they compete with ChatGPT, they come out with their own version of it, which is even far better than the ChatGPTs. So can you name that one? What is the Chat? Yeah, so it is actually off of the cost what the ChatGPT made. So they work on artificial intelligence, machine learning. These are not just a jargon. It is a kind of reality for the China, because in 2005, they had this plan called Made in China. So they announced by like 2025 or 20, we should be having set of achievements, and artificial intelligence is one of them. And they're able to make those breakthrough in it. So artificial intelligence helps not only in the military, again, it also helps very extensively in terms of your economy and the development and other social welfare to reach law enforcement and other areas. So what we saw is in maritime, space, and cyber security. So these are the domains which are very crucial. So the US-China competition, when we talk about, it's actually happening in this domain. So whoever control this, they'll be able to control the global economy, and they control the global security. So they control the global military perception as well. So the competition is happening. Like so the US has a major challenge is like to not only just match with China rising in the next another 10, 15, 20 years, but also competing in terms of to sustain in a major way, because US thinks it has a very global responsibility to cater to it. So this is the major problem what we are seeing. So when you're talking about great power competition, it's not only a political term. It is actually the reality which has been rooted in space, maritime, and in the cyber domain. So the another important aspect when it comes to geopolitical competition, there are typical flashpoints in the Indo-Pacific region, which is the major concern for India as well. One is Taiwan, and one is South China Sea issues. So China wanted to have this part of their mainland China, but there is a huge concern that once China has it, then there won't be any kind of leverage the other countries will have in terms of maritime trade. So do you understand like where is South China Sea? Like you guys are aware where is South China Sea? So what happened? The South China is being taken by the China. So the biggest concern by the Japan and other Southeast Asian countries, including India. So that will be a major challenge for the control of maritime common. So you will be not subjugated by the Chinese laws, but you will be under the constant pressure from China not to use certain type of vessel, because under the United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, Navy vessel has all the rights to travel in the EEZ. They have the freedom of navigation. But China interprets differently. And so they might add extra clauses saying that they won't allow the naval vessel to pass or go in the South China Sea. So that's what happening between the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan Straits, it's not been usable for other countries. So it is extreme pressure from the China, presence of huge naval presence there, and the idea of conflict with Taiwan is imminent. So the Taiwan Straits tend to be like redundant. No one is using the Taiwan Strait. So there is a fear among the scholars. The similar thing will happen in the South China Sea if we don't go unchecked. That's why you can see there is a constant statement criticizing the China for any kind of crisis happening in the South China Sea, particularly with Philippines, where there has been always a clash in terms of establishing these norms. So Another important thing which is happening right now, what we call it is a kind of how the war is restructuring the diplomacy. One is like what we're seeing is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So last 3-4 years, Russia-Ukraine conflict has reached an impasse. So both the countries are not able to come to peace, but still they are trying to establish themselves as a major assertive power. So this has created a major trouble for a country like India. So can you give example of how India has been like become the victim of the circumstances? You know, India is not party to it. So Foreign Minister Jaishankar keeps saying that it is a European problem, which India has nothing to do with. So, but India has been constantly questioned for two terms. One is buying a Russian oil, and second thing, not taking enough initiative to pressuring the Russia to stop the war. So what is your opinion on this? What do you think about what India is doing is right? Or like you think India should have to take a Western line, like pressure Russia to stop the war in Russia-Ukraine war? And I also just wanted you to know, like, why, what is the significance of Russian president recent visit to India? And why do you think that particular visit is important in this particular context where the India trade war with US is like not settled, it's been a major issue. And how do you think it will be impact India? And what do you think that impact would be?
Russia and India, with the two visit to India. And there are two perspectives. From the Russian perspective, West is trying to portray Vladimir Putin as being isolated from the rest of the world, and they are portraying him as a pariah. But this visit to India shows that the propaganda propagated against Russia is only a Western concept, and the rest of the nations have a balanced hand on this issue. Like a democratic country like India, when it was the president of the Russia, it shows that the Russian-Ukraine war has two sides to the story, and diplomacy and only the peace can come with dialogue between the two sides. From Indian perspective, it's more of a statement that India doesn't bow down to US threats and tariffs, and only dialogue and diplomacy can solve the trade issues between the two. We are making a statement that we are having our own strategic autonomy with respect to our foreign policy, and some amount of pressure we can handle it. Our economy is resilient to US compliance.
So yeah, so any other viewpoints you want to add? These are only two things you think it's happening between India and Russia?
Take it from perspectives. The first perspective is the economic perspective. The economic partnership, especially $100 billion trade goal by 2030. The military perspective, that is the recent Rios agreement between India and Russia, as well as where there are mutual military points as well. So that is with respect to, and we have to come to the Indo-Pacific region itself. Considering another player is being added to Indo-Pacific, there is the more the players, the better the balance will be in Indo-Pacific, rather than leading to dominance of one or two players. So it will also ensure better strategic influence of India and Russia in Indo-Pacific, stabilizing the region rather than dominance from either Western bloc or from the Chinese bloc.
Female, like you guys are very quiet. You don't have anything to add to the discussion? What do you think? You agree with this, the perspectives?
We are offering even extra offers as well by USA, so that we can get USA and we are trying to balance the relation. And even external affairs ministers, we are not sitting on the bench, we are sitting on India's land. We do not need to take sides, we have all that in policy.
Yeah, that's actually exactly the word balance. So the biggest challenge India has when it maintains the, that's what I was looking at, the word balance. So the major problem for the middle power like India, it's to balance the relation between the major powers. So It's not that India doesn't want the US. It's not like it's not a zero-sum game. So you understand what is zero-sum game? Yeah, one man's gain. So the IR for particularly to India, it can't be a zero-sum game. So it has to balance its relationship with the USA and USSR. Okay, so India, the USSR commitment goes long back. India-USSR relationship goes long back, where USSR, most of India's military equipments, 90% of its military equipments are sourced from Russia. And our nuclear energy program, it's also had a very close collaboration with Russia. The space with Russia, our space technology, are largely collaborated with Russian scientists in making those. So Russia has been a long-lasting friend for India. So again, in the international politics, there is no permanent friend or permanent enemy. But Russia's interest is also very paramount in the international politics, in diplomacy, when it comes to the issue of Kashmir cases, because that is one of the P5 countries which backed India during any kind of issue related to Kashmir in P5s. So Russia's support in international diplomacy is quite important for India's stature. At the same time, India's relationship with the US is also quite important because it's growing. And when you're talking about the strategic autonomy, it is not about like you are winning over someone, but rather you are trying to pursue your opponent also to understand, make them understand why you are taking your own decision. So what India's position has been very clearly articulated by the foreign minister like Jaishankar, as she said, like, okay, it's based on national interest and it's a kind of European constructed problem. It is not happening in the Asia, and India is not like nowhere party to it. But even though India wanted peace in the region, so war to be stopped, and it wanted the relationship, want to establish good relationship with Russia, Ukraine thing. So the fundamental problem here is the balancing the US-China, sorry, US and Russia. So that is the biggest challenge when it comes to right now. So US actually also putting a lot of pressure on India in terms of stop buying Russian oils, and also wanted to stop buying any kind of military hardware, like for example S-400. So that discussion didn't came. We are many people they're expecting these issues that India whether will go for S-400s. So whether that will actually tip a relationship between India and Russia, because 2 years ago there was a controversy where India said that it is going ahead with buying S-400. So there is a huge challenge for India how to navigate its relationship with the US. But US kept bit not didn't provide any much strong stance against India during the Biden administration. But this won't be happening when it comes to the Trump. So there is a bit of reluctance on the Indian side to pursue more in terms of the S-400. But that is going to be another major challenge for India to how to balance between US and Russia. And another important aspect, what the latest development, what we are witnessing is the India-China relationship. So after the Galwan crisis, there have been a huge gap in India-China relationship. Now, both the sides have agreed that they'll be back on tracking, like focus on building economic cooperations and focus on the areas of cooperation rather than just looking at the boundaries issues. So what is your opinion about India-China recent relations, where India yesterday, I think, has allowed like business visa free, like for the Chinese visitor to come to India. So how do you think India-China relationship in this particular context? Do you think that India-China, because what we have seen when the Prime Minister went to China, he received huge reception from the Chinese side as well, when there was a strong words of exchange happened between India and the US. Even though it is like pre-decided, so it has its own impact in the international politics and diplomacy. So what do you think about like the India-China relationship? Do you think this particular piece will prevail long, or do you think that will be again interpret like it will have some kind of disturbance in the future? Yeah.
We are pursuing cautious cooperation with China. We are being cautious, especially in border terms, because there was recent controversy with respect to the visa issue in the Arunachal Pradesh region as well.
Yeah.
So we are going cautious with respect to our military aspects as well, ensuring military infrastructure in our border regions. At the same time, we are normalizing our relations with China in economic sphere as well, but also the diplomatic channels have been opened, and also the recent Manasa Yatra, Manasa Gangotri Yatra, as well as recent consulates in both the countries, they are also being reopened. At the same time, considering the broader issues, especially with respect to a challenge from USA and China, we are also ensuring focusing on strategic autonomy inwardly, especially by developing our own indigenous AI models, not to depend on China or US in this regard.
So, what do you think about India-China relations? Do you think there is a scope for India and China to really have a close relationship given the history? So, do you think that again there will be like Doklam, Galwan, there will be another crisis? So, what do you think will happen in India-China relationship? Do you think really there is scope to improve?
There is a new normal establishment which is beautiful land, and that we call as status quo, and we have not restored the backward position and original position. So I think China is okay with India as long as it abides by the rules, because it has greater ambitions to run.
Who?
China's
Okay.
But I think
Why do you think China? See, China has resolved all the land boundary issues with all the countries. Like last one to solve it with Vietnam. Yeah, apart from maritime. Why do you think it has kept India's boundary issue alive?
So China wants to unipolar Asia in a multipolar
Yeah.
it wants to continue India.
Why it want to contain India? Do you think India will challenge China? Do you? What is India's defense budget? No, India's defense budget is like around to 6 lakh to 7 lakh crores. So, do you know what is US Navy's budget? Is India's defense budget 80 billion US dollars. That is US Navy's defense budget. So, US defense budget is like around like 600 billions dollars. So, next closest comes the China and Russia. So, around like 100 to 200 billions dollars. So, how do you think India will pose a challenge to China? So how how a sovereign country can be used by another sovereign country? Because India is a kind of a sovereign country, right? So when you say these terms, like the other country will use it, they can really use it. So every country works on their own interest, right? So they drive their policy based on their interest, right? It's not being used. So it fits their agenda. So you go along with it, right? So why I'm trying to say, like, what your definition is, or textbook definitions, but their application in the reality is there is a gap in it. So I just want you to understand why the gap is, why India and China constantly have to fight. Yeah, of course there is a border dispute. But why China wants the India? Why China doesn't want India? Both countries want to, or China doesn't want to solve the boundary dispute with India, and India is very eager to solve the boundary dispute with China, because that will give, because India doesn't have that, because India has a huge issues in terms of other sectors, economic growth, development, education. What is the amount has been like India's defense budget on education in terms of percentage?
3 to 3.5.
3 to, I don't know, 2% of India's GDP probably. So we have 1.3 billion population. So do you think that 5 trillion economy is enough for 1.3 billion population? So, but over the top of it, you have a constant conflict with Pakistan on them. So now it has been like even more aggressive, like even though it is before it is born, what is little bit of under the control now, the post Operation Sindhu, India has taken a very offensive action against. I'll come later into that particular aspect. So how do you think India-China relationship will boom given the context where you're constantly facing a threat with Pakistan and China as a major power? It's not competing with you. It is the China's major challenge is US, it's not India. But why they want to pursue India's, why they want to trouble India, like for example, put it in a very colloquial way. Why they don't want to settle any border dispute with India?
The relationship between India and China has been viewed in the sense of its own relationship with Pakistan. Even if it centers its border disputes with India, India will never become a landing for China. But by troubling India, China can gain a credible ally with Pakistan. Pakistan has no forms in becoming a subsidiary state of China as such. With Pakistan,
Sorry, what? Pakistan doesn't want to be the
it has no comms.
comms means?
Like it has no problems with becoming a tool for Chinese propaganda. Pakistan pursues its own foreign policy such that it wants to take Kashmir away from us, and it will cooperate with whomever it is will make it help them achieve that goal. Now it is China, so they follow China. China wants to keep India in check.
See,
So it is a paradox in itself.
no, not paradox. You're not understanding the point here. So what is the problem we are discussing between India and China here?
You are saying that India, China,
No, just give me the answer.
China is scared of the growth it had.
No. So India-China problem, we are seeing about like Doklam and Galwan crisis, not the war. But you're not talking about Akshay Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. Why you're not talking about this? Because you're being constantly nudged in different direction. Once you solve this particular problem, India will step up its interest with getting back Akshay Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. So that China doesn't want it to. Akshay Chin is with China. Are you sure? You know, right? So we are not discussing that, right? So the problem is, once if you are talking about discussing about problem, whatever the boundary settlement, it's also include Akshay Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. So that China doesn't want it to give to India.
if we go for a boundary settlement dispute, it's like India and China will reach a compromise somewhere that not the present Akshay will, some part of Akshay will remain with China. That's the boundary settlement.
No, that is your, it's not the India's interest. India's interest is Akshay Chin is part of India, right? Arunachal Pradesh is mostly part of Arunachal Pradesh, like 90,000 square kilometers. It's with China. No, what you heard is not important. What is the government policy on this? Have you seen the government of India's map? Has it anywhere said it's Akshay Chin is part of China? So the problem here is twofold. One, China wanted India to occupy because the emerging power tried to always challenge the dominant power. It will question the status quo. India is an emerging power, though once it becomes emerged as a major power, it will have a kind of again question China's status quo in this region, despite if we have any kind of peaceful resolution in the border areas. So China wants to keep the issue under the radar as long as it controls the peace. You understand? So in all the cases, Galwan and Doklam and all the cases, it is not the Indian troop which started all the skirmishes, because they have understood and they have tried to push India to the level. So we will dictate the peace in the region. So whenever they wanted the peace, they will come for the peace, and if they wanted to trouble India in similar way, then they'll go on like in Ghana. So, and second thing is, China doesn't want the India to be focused on Indian Ocean or expand in the Indian Ocean. So China has an advantage India doesn't have in terms of when you talk about maritime. Can you tell anybody when it's no, not like that. Like what I'm trying to say is that India doesn't have an advantage what China. India continentally, it has been blocked by both Pakistan and China. So it cannot have any kind of land route or land connectivity to any of the Central Asian countries or West Asian countries. But China can do a land trade through Xinjiang province towards Central Asia and West Africa. There is a rail link between the Europe and China. So they can do a trade activity on land with other countries. India can't do it. Even to export any kind of relief material to Afghanistan, either we have to go to Chabahar port, Iran, and has to go. So India has a very disadvantaged position on the land. Okay, so India wants more prominent role in the Indian Navy, but China, which is actually expanding its naval force, possibly in the future it will operate the navy in Indian Ocean. Because in South China Sea, it's very constrained. Southeast Asia, like you have Taiwan, you have Japan, it's been Guam, like US naval bases and all those things. It's highly constrained place to operate. So China is planning and building its force to operate in the Indian Ocean. So they don't want India to be very active in the Indian Ocean. So they wanted to be preoccupied in the land dispute in both in Pakistan and in the China. So these are the larger ideas, like these are the perspectives which the China is trying to operate. So ultimately the goal is you don't allow your emerging power to challenge your status quo. So there is something called Thucydides trap. Have you read that book, Thucydides trap? Do you know? Thucydides, you know Thucydides? Have you anybody saw the 300s, the movie called 300s? Do you know the first documented war between Spartans and Athens? Do you know why Spartans and Athens, why they fight? So this is the basics actually you should understand. So what happens, Spartans and Athens are two the Greek countries. So one is very dominant maritime power and one is a very land-centric. So what happened when the two countries became powerful, there's actually become dilemma, like security dilemma. So the rising power, which is Athens, tried to challenge the existing power. So there is a scholar like Thucydides who documented the war between these two great powers. And recently there is a book which is written by the US scholar. He talks about this Thucydides trap, where he says that the emerging power will try to replace the existing power. So either it can happen by force or it can happen by peaceful way. The peaceful was like how the UK gave up the position as the number one power, where the US became the number one power without conflict. In the history, he has documented around like 15 to 20 cases where the war happened, where the emerging power tried to replace the existing power using the force, and there are scenarios not by using the force, by the peaceful means. So the emerging power will. So this is the question of like question of for China. So what would be India's position if it became a very dominant power? If it become a kind of achieved 15 trillion economy. So that is the question for China. So your economy, if it become very strong and very like robust, so what is you're going to be a priority? You want bring back Daksha Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. So it will question the status quo in that border. So that's what the Chinese questions is. So that is the problem what we are having between India and China. But given this position, the situations are very complicated. As I said, the China dictates the term of peace in the region. Like so, they have the advantage in terms of their military strength and operating in a high altitude. So India doesn't have that kind of advantage. So that is the reason I thought like India, like the 5 trillion economy is not enough. Like if you want to become a major power, you have to like even to go like 10 to 15 trillion. So you fund. So the development has to be very comprehensive, not only on selected like pockets of success. So that is very important for India. So coming back to another active war which actually restructured diplomacy is Israel-Hamas war, which actually a kind of a fantastic example of in 21st century how the diplomacy has tried to replace, like how the war between Hamas and Gaza and how it has spread larger into domain in terms of how Iran came into the picture and Yemen came into the picture. So how do you think these particular scenarios affected regional security? Any thoughts? How do you think India is affected by Israel-Gaza war? So what is the difference between West Asia and Middle East? Middle East. Yeah, from Indian perspective, is West Asia. Right. So, but crude oil comes from Iraq, right? So, how do you think it's affect?
The trade with the European nations because the Houthi issue in the Red Sea crisis, where India had to send the Operation Sankalp for resolving that. And also another issue being India's developmental projects, the partnership projects like INBC, they are stalled right now because of the Middle East crisis as well. And also, especially even with respect to economic cooperation as well. So the Middle East Quad that was yet to be formed, that was also on stall.
No, but the question is not about that. I'm talking about Palestine issue. So, what is India's position right now?
Two-state policy.
Sorry,
Two-state policy.
what is that?
So India supports coexistence of both Israel and Palestine,
So,
given the 1948 borders.
okay. So, any other views? So, don't use jargons. Okay. Jargons are used by big scholars and it has its own meaning. So, don't use it.
What was the third?
It's just twisted policy something.
Two-state.
Oh, two-state policy. I heard two-state policy. Two-state policy, yeah. Oh, I heard twisted policy. Sorry. So, any other?
So, our original policy was geared towards humanitarian perspectives. So, India having gone through colonial occupation and freedom struggle, it was more geared towards Palestine in the beginning, and it rotated to two-state policy. But right now, the significant imports of defense from Israel has also made us rethink our ties, because we have to put our national interest before our regional interest or this issue. So we are trying to balance both Israel and Palestine and hold up our values on the one side and our national interest on the other side.
So, what is India's position on Palestine issue now?
It hasn't changed, so it's still advocating for two-state policies. But we are backing the US backed peace plans.
Okay. Any other? Any other issues? Yeah. So, Israel Gaza, this issue has been a major important aspect in India's policy. Like they largely it's sought out because like India-Israel relationship has been picking up in terms of defense cooperations. So many actually expected that India will take a kind of breach the previous stances and take a different approach. But yeah, India still follow the same two-state policy. But what's significant is that like it has never condemned Israel in any strong terms. That is a very new point we can mention here when there is a war is full-fledged war is happening. So there is no strong condemnation, but still the policy level like that's there is no significant change. That's very important. So sorry.
We have DI benefit
Yeah.
in the past.
True.
India has also highlighted Israel's right to defend itself, especially from the terrorism.
Yeah, the Hamas thing. Yeah, that's true. But I'm talking about whether Hamas is banned under India's terrorist right. Hamas has been banned in India. No. Yeah. So the Palestine rights has been like still the question, but India hasn't taken any strong opposition to the Israel occupying of Gaza. And so there is no any critical government statement as long as India-Israel relationship has been strong. But when it comes to the issue of Palestine, it remains the same. So the policy here is very much in favor of India's interest and India's relationship with Israel. It's more prominent. So that has been a biggest critique from the scholars, where they think that there is many countries, European countries, which call the act as actually as genocidal and all those things, but India hasn't vocally said anything about those things. So many scholars criticized India for that. But India policy stands on policy remains the same as in like 1940s. So another important aspect I just want to focus on the global world economy. So we are talking about like there is a huge debate which is happening saying that when the tariff war has been started, so a lot of people scholarly criticize the globalization is over. So because everybody is going a protectionist approach, like every country want to protect their industry and the state interest, and so they have been like increasing the tariff. So what is your opinion about like this deglobalizing? So do you think that the world which is heading towards deglobalization, or it's restructuring itself to the new demands, what's happening around the world, given the present tariff changes, which even Mexico has like imposed like 50% of tariff on Indian goods? So what do you think? Do you think that protectionism is back, or do you think that globalization is restructuring itself?
That's the what
Multilateralism?
is deteriorating everywhere. Multilateral institutions like UN have no significant value in the present structure. But I think the world is restructuring.
What it had a value before? In what way you think that UN didn't have any value before, and it had value now? So what is the function of UN actually? So every state has its own interest and it's going to work. So what is the difference between League of Nations and UN? And so where it actually really the UN actually draws the line in terms of its development?
Sir, I know the original intention of UN establishment of UN was to prevent the World War II peace. Basically, to prevent World War III, it was established.
So yeah, but what is the UN? What is the role of UN in present global governance?
Sir, even
Success.
with the only body with 193 countries, they can come together and have some discussions and deliberations. The second aspect is with respect to UN HRC, Human Rights Council as well, and also the peacekeeping process and all. And also during COVID, UN took a stance to help the other nations, especially developing nations and underdeveloped nations.
Yeah,
So even today there is relevance.
UN has its limitations. So it role is very limited. It has a limitation, but it has played an important role in terms of building like 50-60 years of global governance. So what we're talking about, like for example, you have COP, right? Recently concluded in Brazil. So it is a discussion about the climate change, which happens under the UN. And you have United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, maritime rules and regulation, everything comes from the UN, like it's a part of UN. BBNG, like, you know, blue economy, what we are talking, you know, like BBNG? Yeah, beyond the national jurisdictions, like how to, biodiversity, how to maintain, it's under the UN. So, International Maritime Organization, International Court of Justice, ITLOS, International Tribunal of Law, everything is the kind of offshoot of UN. So I'm talking about, I know only maritime. So I'm just talking about what's happening in the maritime. So International Maritime Organization, again, it's a kind of, came from the UNCLOS. So UN has its role, but it can't play a very political role and you have a kind of intervention stand in the global politics. Okay. So it has its limitation to be understand like how the UN can be restructured to work in certain global issues, rather than just dismissing, saying that, okay, it is useless. It has its role, but it can't be an interventionist. It can't intervene in any kind of global conflict. That's what happened to the League of Nations. Why League of Nations went to into the dust? Why then? Why? What is the reason for it? Because it tried to be an intervention. It won't put a kind of played a taxman role on Germany, like imposing, saying that you can't produce this much of armaments and everything. So it doesn't have, because each international system is what? Why UN can't play a very intervention role? Yeah, but international system is anarchy, right? So why each and every country works on their own interest? Because International system is anarchy. So under this, the set of challenges, so bringing each countries to discuss certain issues itself a big challenge, because each and every country's policy is different. Even UNCLOS, when all the countries signed that clause, not everybody agreed to all the clauses in UNCLOS. Okay, the discussion started in even before during League of Nations, and it finally got signed in 1982. Because not all the countries, if you go by clause and clause, India has its own India's maritime law, which says 24 nautical miles is our territorial water, but under the UNCLOS is 12 nautical miles under, because we largely agree on the basis for the good of the human being. So we act in a certain, but UN has its own limitations. So yeah, we are derailing from the actual. So the global economy, so WTO, World Trade Organization, another best example how, of course there are challenges. Of course it has to be restructured in order to emerging issues in the society. The climate change, apart from climate change, there are many other issues which we've been talking about. The UN can step up and play an important role. Even the COP, right? The climate change issues, like there is an agreement that all the country will reduce 1.5 degree. It's highly impossible to do that. But still, Asian countries are trying to play in what way they can cooperate and try to mitigate these issues. So the climate change has been a major crisis, right? Like what's happening in India, it's a very classical example of climate change and how the pollution can be a very harmful for the society growth and development and everything. So it's not only Delhi which we had been talking about. Mumbai actually also been put under the kind of AQI is increasing in Delhi, Mumbai. Okay, so this is not a kind of isolated issue. So, and it's not a very country-specific issues. These are transnational issues. It's not like only affecting Delhi. Pollution is not only affecting Delhiites. It's affecting, you have all the embassies in the Delhi, right? So your global images get affected by this, right? So there are many issues which need to be in transnational in nature, which has to be addressed in particular way. So deglobalizing, so there are two set of opinions here. Two set of issues here. One, either you can argue saying that, okay, the government like trade protection laws like tariff, which is trying to restructure the global trade, and tariff is helping in a certain way, or you can say that it is going to be a the globalization didn't work. So there are two set of interesting aspects, but actually the present, according to the United Nations Center for Trade Development, so 2025 outlook, they have mentioned that the global trade is going to fail like significantly for this particular, according to the projection, because of the tariff has been the main reason. There won't be any major significant happens. So again on multilateralism, when you talk about, which is another important issue, is particularly there is an expansion of multilateralism. Do you know, understand what is multilateral? Not UN, I'm talking about UN. I'm talking about like Quad and AUKUS and BRICS. So this is emerging. So what's happening is again the challenge that UN is not able to address. So in the absence of UN, which they are not able to address the security challenges in the Indo-Pacific or any other part, so these new institutions are coming up. You have like Quad between India, Australia, US and Japan, and you have Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which has been completely headed by China, and you have like BRICS, again all the major countries like major power like Brazil, Russia, India, China coming back on one fold, and AUKUS, actually it's a kind of minilateralism specifically on building nuclear technologies. So this is again another symptoms where all the countries are working together to address the issue which UN is not able to address, like BRICS and SCO. So I just want to get your opinion about what do you think about like BRICS, Quad. So do you think this is actually helping India in what way?
So it has its own issue-specific advantages. For example, if you take BRICS, it will help in the future for reorganization of the world economy. When you take Quad, rebalance in China and having the secure Indo-Pacific with this goal, and it can fulfill. So if you take its own issues and goals, and these unilateral institutions will achieve with the faster decision making process and cooperation.
Any questions? You guys? What do you think? Like the Quad? Do you think that Quad can really challenge China or balance China from taking any aggressive actions in Indo-Pacific? In what way do you think Quad helping is quite helpful? Like, is it China centric? Quad is China centric?
Yeah, we are focusing on mutual cooperation between these four countries in the Indo-Pacific region, and also ensuring that we need free and open Indo-Pacific. So to ensure the territorial integrity of all the nations, that Indo-Pacific Quad is being taken.
So free and open means like from whom you wanted free and open?
So that all nations can be equal participants in this region, not just only for China or India. The major drawback of Quad, according to other nations, which they said, is that India is not willing to enter into a military alliance, where India is willing to contribute militarily to the expansion of Quad. So that China is also playing to their advantage, that we are not willing, because of our own policy, that we are not entering into a military alliance. But at the end of the day, this economic cooperation and defense cooperation, especially its acquisition of new technology, will help India build its own deterrence against China.
Yeah, we think like Quad is China centric? Huh? You don't have idea about it? Due to the preparation? That's a very important aspect. So So what is your background? BCom. Okay. So any other ideas, like why? How it is useful to India? That's what I'm asking for. So one is like we established that okay, it's not China centric, and so China doesn't want to antagonize. Sorry, India doesn't want to antagonize China. So like Japan also doesn't want to antagonize. Like Australia also doesn't want to antagonize, claiming that is actually China centric. So why is that the Quad is important for India? So what are the other things India is trying to and Quad is trying to do in terms of achieving its balance against China, or like building close cooperation with these countries? No idea. So did you saw Quad statement, last year's statements, the US?
They launched this operation.
Yeah, there are multiple areas that's been identified, from submarine cable protections to medical issues like building technological development, like having like a maritime governance with Southeast Asian countries, like ASEAN-centric approach. So this is a very functionalist approach. So when all the four countries have a different political agendas in mind, so the only way to cooperate on the technical issues. So they have listed the technical issues where they can cooperate. So one of the thing is submarine cables, which is like a very important aspect where these countries say that they will cooperate in terms of. Do you know submarine cables? You know submarine? Have you heard this term submarine cables? No. So most of your internet goes through the cables, right? It's not like you're not using satellites for transmitting like your WhatsApp chat. It goes to the submarine cable. It has been connected to the US software network, US network, like Facebook, and whatever the message you send, even to anybody in the room, it goes to the US and it comes back to that particular person. So it is not using satellite. It goes to the land From here, telecom tower, from tower it goes underground, and it uses the submarine cable which has been buried under the water in the ocean floor, and it goes to the US. So what do you think there will be a challenge for it? Just like it's not a complicated problem. Huh? Yeah, there will be a willful sabotage, or like there will be some like accident happens, and yeah, Nord Stream pipeline issues kind of thing. So attributing the threat, attribution is the biggest problem here. So whoever does sabotage in high seas, it's very difficult to ascertain, like say that this particular person has conducted, because you don't have a surveillance over the entire ocean. So anybody can be like conduct any kind of attack on the submarine cables, and you find those disruption, but you don't know what's happening. If you follow the submarine cable, then you'll understand, okay, your network down is because of there is some kind of sabotage happened in the submarine cable. There are 2 landing stations in India, submarine cables. Do you know where it is? One is in Mumbai and one is in Chennai. Okay, it's all mostly controlled by the multinational corporations, nothing to do with nation state. So all the submarine cables are laid and monitored, governed by the major conglomerates like Meta, Facebook, and other Google. These are the people who actually lay those cables, and if there's any repair, they are the one who carries out those repair. State has any policy. TRI has come out with the policy how to govern this particular issue. So I'm just trying to highlight some of the issues which has been increasingly important aspect in international politics. So when you're talking about Quad has talked about submarine cables. The China has submarine cables as well, and they don't connect with international global system. They have their own submarine cable, which doesn't couple with global submarine cables, because they wanted to maintain complete autonomy in that field. So they have a peace cable which passed through the Pakistan, through like to the Middle East. Okay, so these are the global. I took a lot of time in discussing global geopolitics. So India's neighborhood, like policy we will focus on, like here. So I just want to highlight another important point in India's foreign policy is we discussed about China's risk management, like selective re-engagement, and how we also discussed about multilateralism when it comes to India's foreign policy, emerging trends in. So global south has been a major agenda where India is trying to push, and like forum like BRICS and other multilateralism we discussed. So I just want to talk about like what do you think about Operation Sindoor? Why it is significant? So what are the major change happened in the Operation Sindoor? So you have any ideas? What do you think has happened after Operation Sindoor?
Shifting India's strategic silence towards strategic assertiveness, and also no differentiation between state and non-state threats against India. And also, India, if it threatens the national security of India, India will cross the borders if it becomes a necessity as well. So that was also asserted. And also the Dover doctrine, defensive offense and offensive defense.
Attack of terror will be considered as an attack for the first operation. So that is one major change. The second one is that before this operation, every other operation was operated within what India legally claims its own territory. For example, we attacked in Balapur states and in the Bhuj states. When we conducted our surgical strikes, it was within Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which India claims itself as its own territory. But it is our own territory. But in operations, we legally crossed our own boundary, went into the enemy's territory.
Do you know what is Clausewitz definition of war? Clausewitz definition of war. Clausewitz. Von Clausewitz. You know Clausewitz, right? You not studied Clausewitz on war? Okay. So yes, sorry, yeah. There's a scholar, Clausewitz. He actually, what is the definition of war? Policy by other means. Okay. Policy by other means. So that is the definition of the war. So we are not looking at the tactical aspect here. So I'm talking about the political impact. Okay. So when I ask the operation, it's like achieving a political objective. Okay. We are not talking about the tactical or operational aspect of those things. Either you have the information or I have the information, right? So when we're talking about operations, you should be focusing on the political aspect. So politically, what we have done differently from the previous thing. So what is different here? That's what I am asking. So the policy by other means, it's not politics, policy. The state will decide to go for a war. That is a policy of a state. So that is the classic definition of war, and still now it is being used on war studies to understand what is war. Okay. So the Operation Sindhu has some political objectives. So I'm just asking what is the political objective of it?
Isolation of Pakistan, the broader geopolitics, and also as soon as operations into India sent its diplomatic missions to other nations to gain validation, especially considering it was considered an act of terrorism against India. So indeed, India took a moral high ground with respect to action against terrorism, not action against a state.
Sir, upheld its zero tolerance towards terrorism.
Okay.
And second, it now doesn't differentiate between terrorist and sponsor of some country.
And politically also, another aspect is after the Operation Sindhu, from Argentina and other countries, there has been an increased demand for NAC system, anti-missile system as well.
Okay.
So India displayed its military resilience, even with BrahMos as well as the Rafale and NAC systems and all.
So anybody? What do you think like political outcome of Operation Sindhu? What do you think is political objective of it? So yeah. So how many of you heard this word conventional deterrence? Conventional deterrence. So what India is trying to do is like operation is not it is past. Okay, it is not discontinued or it is not like closed. It's not over. So India is trying to bring a conventional deterrence against the Pakistan, which is being matched only with Pakistan Army and Indian Army. But in this particular case, it wants to deter Pakistan. So even if any kind of remotely which you are aware or not aware, and if you're trying to any kind of attack which happens in India and which has been linked to remotely also to Pakistan, India will retaliate in a very severe fashion. So it's a conventional deterrence India is trying to build against Pakistan. So it's not retaliating, it's not like just an action based on countering the terrorism, that's important, but you also want to build a deterrence against Pakistan. So you're using your conventional means to deter the Pakistan. What is your conventional? Your military, using a military force in non-military actions. Okay, so you are building a conventional deterrence. So that is the major pivot of Operation Sindhu. Okay, the political outcome is trying to, for a global reach, to sensitize about the issue of terrorism in the region vis-a-vis with Pakistan. So that is the very important highlight of the Operation Sindhu. And continuing other important step Government of India has taken in order to ensure how to combat the latest challenges like the drone, which has been a major part of this particular Operation Sindhu. So the entire strategy is not just looking at how you're using conventional major weapon system, but also looking at other non-conventional weapon systems like drones, which has been extensively used in Russia-Ukraine war. So how this is also been seen in Operation Sindhu. Both the countries like India and Pakistan have used drones extensively in the border, not only in Kashmir, till across the international borders. So that is a very important aspect where India also like try to build more resilience, like in terms of building newer capabilities to attack Pakistan in any kind of future skirmishes. So I just want to highlight India's neighborhood policy. So there's a huge crisis happened in the India's neighborhood, right? Two important events, Nepal and Bangladesh. And when we talk about India's neighborhood, can you list in neighborhood country, India's neighborhood country, India's neighbors? Pakistan? Okay. You all agree with this list? India's neighborhood? Yeah. How that became the India's neighbor? Malaysia. With Thailand, yes. But Malaysia? No, Indonesia you can climb. Yeah. Maldives, yeah. That's why it's because under Sagar. Do you know Sagar? What is Sagar? Yeah. So Sagar actually defines India's neighborhood not only on the continental aspect but also expand from the maritime. From the tip of Maldives is like 200-300 kilometers from India's borders, and same from the Andaman Nicobar, Phuket, like Thailand, one of the. So it's India's neighborhood. Like from Andaman Nicobar, uh, Indonesia is also very close. Indonesian islands also is very close. So the Sagar redefines India's neighborhood policy, not looking at only just continental where, but also, and it's very important also to realize these countries also a very important country for India. Okay, so so what happening recently, and three issues, the major flashpoint in India's neighborhood is one has happened in Bangladesh. There is a regime change. Hasina has been taken, like India gave a kind of asylum to her. And what happened in the Nepal, what it's been like in popular culture called Gen Z revolution, and what has been occurring in, it's been happening in, which is the country, another major trouble, not Pakistan. Myanmar. So the civil war there. So the increasing force of my isolation of the government forces there, and none of the government force doesn't share any boundary with any other countries. So the huge issues of human crisis in terms of humanitarian issues in Myanmar, where India is also actively involved to look at how it can be solved. And what happened in Bangladesh, again, it's completely tipped how Bangladesh went in favor of Pakistan, and immediately Pakistan generals and been visiting Bangladesh, and how the radical groups in Bangladesh targeting the Indians and Hindu worshippers, and how that has created a major impact in the bilateral relationship. And in particularly in Nepal, how this particular issue has been transcended into a kind of how India's involvement could have been a major problem. So what is your stake on all those issues? India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Myanmar.
Bangladesh case, we are waiting for the democratic elections to happen so that we can re-establish diplomatic aspects. And also in Nepal's case, India has taken a stance of Gujarat Doctrine itself, non-interference in internal politics. So in Myanmar's case also same. At the same time, securing our borders throughout all these nations, especially because of the intrusion of Myanmari aspects during the Manipur crisis. Manipur crisis.
So Myanmar crisis is a huge one because there's an open border and open trade in this area. So there is a huge problem for India to maintain the land border. Same with Bangladesh, it's an open border. So Nepal again. So these are the countries. The instability in this region also has an impact on India's security in terms of illegal migrations, and there is a chances the radical elements slipping into the India and try to create the sentiment in India as well. So this is major challenge for India in terms of its neighborhood policy. So India is one of the major democracy in the region. So other neighbor countries also look up to the India, how the India conducts. So India conducts elections. India brings representative from these countries to show that how the election is being conducted. So India has been involved in terms of building the development and economic and growth with the neighbor countries. So there's been a always challenge in India. The India's number one foreign policy is neighborhood first policy, but still it is still struggles in terms of battling these issues. They are not able to win the confidence of the local populace, at the same time the political parties, which always seems to be against India's interest in the region. So that's why the India's challenge in terms of its India's neighborhood first policy. So what we have seen repeatedly in Maldives, when the new what happened in the Sri Lanka, similarly against anti-India sentiment, which has been continued. This is major challenge for India's neighborhood first policy. So this is to be taken seriously, like where to address these particular issues. So that is my opinion. So we are running out of time, so I just list out some of the major external and foreign policy challenges for India. One is what we discussed, managing China's threat. So that is going to be a long time and high intensity competition, so broader frictions. So that will keep India in a sustained risk management posture with periodic escalation risk and high resource demand. In Pakistan, we saw that how subconventional military major challenge. So it's not only Pakistan. We saw in Operation Sindhu, one of the important aspect, the Chinese help with Pakistan actually has been quite visible. So any kind of future conflict between Pakistan, we can assume, not only assume, we can be sure there's going to be huge Chinese assistance to Pakistan. Pakistan major Air Force modernization is include buying a lot of Chinese equipments and systems. So China wants to use Pakistan as a base to show off its military prowess in terms of military technology to supply, like become a kind of market. So China-Pakistan nexus is going to be important challenge for India in future, even if it is a Pakistan-centric war happens. And as we discussed, neighborhood political issues, volatility in the region going to continue, even though it is still Nepal and Bangladesh. Tomorrow it might be Sri Lanka and Maldives. So this is where the India challenges lies. How to win over the populace, political parties and governance system. What are the means to achieve it? It's very important. And there is also competition from the external forces. China is also want to build close relationship with these countries. They have huge investment in Maldives. They have huge investment in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Thailand. So there is a huge challenge how to compete with China in terms of its infrastructure and development in this region. So that is another important point. And so as we talked about Sagar, maritime security is one of the important. So Indian Navy is one of the largest naval forces in this region. So it has the highest responsibility in maintaining peaceful, good order at sea. So that is another important aspect. So West Asia volatility is again a major problem here. The challenges in Iran and what's happening in the Yemen and other parts of the West Asia, it's completely continued to grow as a kind of challenge for India in terms of any kind of relationship with the region. So again, the trade fragmentation, tariffs, so that can be a temporary thing, but still it is going to have a huge long-term repercussions for India in terms of its growth and how it is going to conduct its foreign policy with countries like US, Europe. But we also have witnessed India also diversifying its trade partners, building close relationship with Europe, Japan, Korea. So India is also looking at the technology as the main center of its bilateral cooperation with many other countries. So in any joint statement, if you see that the technology has been one of the key drivers where India want to build. So India's challenges want to make India as a self-reliance. So its focus should be more on technology and economic growth. So no country is going to give you technology at the free of cost. So even if they're going to give, it is going to be it has its own intention behind it. So it's important for India to build its own technological capabilities in advanced systems, artificial intelligence, machine learning, hypersonic missiles, or any other aspect. So the technology, if India want to achieve self-reliance, it has to have its own technology pros, so that it will put India in terms of in high table negotiations. So again, we discussed about balancing multiple partners like US, Russia, that is going to be important. And other important like climate change issues. So that has been a major things like for India. So India is a few countries which actually support climate COP and other kind of mechanism, actively participates in international forum advocating the climate to solve the climate change issues. So I'll stop here, and if you have any issues, please let me know. We'll be happy to answer.
So in the interview, we are supposed to take a stand. If India should choose between Russia and US, what should be, what should our
It's strategic autonomy, right? So it's what India is trying to do is balance the relation between the two countries. So both US and US are very important for India in terms of its growth, development, and to achieve its like the agenda, like domestic. So it's very important for India to have a good relationship with both the countries. So, but this is not like, again, as I said, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like what India treats okay and taking sides here. So India will see what fit its agenda. So it will frame policy according to its interest. Even though it has some, what we saw in Trump tariff issue itself, even though Trump tariff has been very, very harsh on India, but India that doesn't want to give up its position on its stance on the international tariff or its policies. So despite all the pressure, and it has been seen in the past also, even in the US, India-US relationship, it is not the new dynamics. It's India-US relationship had so many challenges before. For example, 123 agreement, nuclear agreement, post-nuclear test, India has faced huge embargoes in terms of how it navigated. So ultimately, the national interest drives India's policy towards the country. So it's a balancing. The right term we have to use is the balance. No, China has all the rights to use the Hambantota, or like the freedom of navigation. But the challenge is not immediate. But the problem is, in future, China will be operating its submarines or aircraft carriers or like destroyers or any other warships, which will put India in a very disadvantaged position in terms of its interest, because there are a lot of small island countries like Seychelles, Madagascar, Maldives, Mauritius, and these countries, India has been a net security provider. So we have been like engaging with these countries. So when Chinese Navy come and takes a very active position, so they have an option like to go with China also. So that actually puts India's interest and the kind of outreach or the influence in the region. It will minimize India's influence in the region. So that is the major challenge. So ultimately in Indian Ocean, the ocean, many countries operates in this part of the world. Like US has, France, Germany, UK, they have the warships in the Indian Ocean. But the problem here is China is not coming to Indian Ocean just as like these countries are here, but it also want to expand its influence in the region. So these countries, China will respond to their needs and necessity in big larger scale where India is not able to provide. So that will be a challenge for India's interest. India, we are Indian Ocean, so there is, because Djibouti, China need it in Djibouti because they are operating far away from the position, so they need a position. But we are in the center of Indian Ocean, so you don't require the bases. But ultimately, if there is a scenario where India have to work in those kind of scenarios, like where your trade has been expanded, like what we are talking about, like 15-20 trillion economy, once it happens like another 15-20 years, your responsibility also increases because your trade is coming far away from other countries. You have to secure your trade route because no country is going to support your security in far. For example, it's happening like in Pacific Ocean. Like if you don't have your reach, ultimately someone will try to sabotage your interest in the region. So in order to show off strength, you need bases probably in the future, but it's ultimately depends upon all tied up with your economy. Any questions?
Divide their skills into places, and how will that be disadvantages to India, and what do you do if such a situation arises?
So the US actually trying to look at uh, the NSS like the more reoriented itself looking at China now. So their major competition is China. They think China is going to replace them as a major part. And as we discussed in terms of the dominance in the domains like space, maritime, or cyber, or any other domains, global common. So the influences have been increasing a lot. So they think that is will diminish US influence in the region. So once the US power of influence has been diminished, so the China will become a kind of epicenter of power in the region. So all the countries like Japan, South Korea, which rely on US for its security, will shift their focus towards China. So ultimately, as we discussed, it's a rationality, right? It's not like emotional decision. So whoever can provide it. So Japan and South Korea have US bases because US is a major superpower. Once if they are not able to guarantee their security, they will go for the person who's providing the security. If China says that I can do it, then they'll go with China. So ultimately, it's based on their national interest. So that is the thing. So I think the US has been shifting towards the Indo-Pacific more prominently, and India has to negotiate with US. That is the biggest challenge India has, given the present Trump administration. So India has to gear up its diplomacy even though India US is a very good relationship. Even though tariff is, I think it's a very momentary, but it will have some kind of repercussions. But I think India US relationship will bound to grow because of the China factor, and India can use that as a leverage to build its strength in terms of technology capabilities and all this stuff. Taiwan actually, China actually bit. I think Kashmir issues like it's in the UN. So China has been actively supporting Pakistan side in terms of Kashmir. Yeah. But in Taiwan, that would be very tricky for India to do it because India, when it goes to Taiwan, then probably China might step up their position on Kashmir even severe. Even India has a major two set of issues. One is Kashmir, and another one is Tibet issues, also a major challenge between India and China. And Taiwan, again, it's a kind of scenario where India has been maintaining a very cautious approach, and it reiterates what it's for, yeah? One China policy. But even Japan also, like to the extent, follows the same policy. But India is a bit cautious not to antagonize China. So India approach towards Quad or anything, it doesn't want to antagonize China. So the problem would be like, as former Chief of Naval Staff said, so India is the only country among the Quad countries which share the land boundary with China. So if any China is going to act very aggressively, is none of these countries going to come for the help. And so diplomatically they'll be useful, but ultimately the India has to face a challenge. So India probably, as I say, that it's been largely doing a risk management, following the escalating the strategy. So that's where India has been, and India is not willing to have two-front war actively. So India is very careful. So I think that is the reason India has been very silent. Not silent, actually India has taken a position where India-Taiwan relationship has been growing up, but it doesn't want to put in the crosshair between India and China. It's very cautious in making any statement, Japanese Prime Minister made. Like India is a bit cautious, unlike Japan. Any questions? So that's it. We'll stop the session.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an enlightening session on India's foreign policy as well as India's neighbor relations and the various geopolitical scenario. I hope the session was very enlightening and very helpful for the interview candidates, and it was very interactive as well. So for the upcoming interview session, we have on upcoming Saturday and Sunday this week. Yes, sir. So you can meet personally also, sir, if you have any doubt, you want to discuss with sir, you can discuss. And upcoming Saturday and Sunday, we are going to conduct mock interview, panel interview. And also if any one of you have, they want more interactive session or more intensive on DAF discussion, personalized interview mentorship program, you can reach us to. Okay, thank you. All the very best.